just petrol in Nigeria.
Which candidate shall we say? How about you start, Mr. Kachikwu, and then we'll go to Prince Adebayo.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The question has never been about the relevance of fuel subsidy The challenge we've had as a country is the fact that this has been a gaping hole where a few briefcase billionaires have used to siphon billions of naira from our country. Our law enforcement in the last in the last decade has not been able to put a stop to this. Rather than let a whole nation continue to pay for the crimes of a few people, most people now advocate for the removal of fuel subsidy, and so that they can put the gains in a transparent process that benefits most Nigerians. So if I were to remove fuel subsidy, I'll put what we gain into social infrastructure like transportation, education, healthcare, and what have you. The Jonathan government, when they tried to remove fuel subsidy, we saw them bringing in a lot of buses, trying to ramp up the government of our rail system. But Nigerians didn't buy into that at that time, and we had a lot of protest. We still see the same problems today. What they had experienced then is what we still experience today. We speak about fuel subsidy, but we have disparate pricing across Nigeria. What we pay for fuel in Lagos is not what they pay in Adamawa or in Port Harcourt or in Aba. So because we have disparate pricing across the country, we know that subsidy is not uniform. Some people are paying more for this price, for this petrol price. So if we still have this problem in an import-dependent economy, in an oil-producing nation, we need to start looking at mechanisms that we can use to solve this problem. We then need to go away from PMS and start looking at alternative sources of energy like CNG or PNG or whatever. We need to start looking at the gases, okay, to power our vehicles. We then also need to start bringing in more refineries. We've spoken about refineries for too long in Nigeria, and one begins to wonder, is refining a rocket science? Mm-hmm. Nations that don't produce oil are importing crude oil and they are refining. How does it make sense that a country like Nigeria that produces crude oil, that we can't refine petroleum products? But let me tell you one of the biggest challenges. Every year, we have almost 100 billion naira, they say, that goes into the refineries. They still don't work, but nobody has paid any price. I've not seen anybody charge to cut. And because of this, because this becomes a pipe that they used to siphon funds, nothing happens. So we need to plug those holes. While we accept that we need to protect our people, we also know that we cannot continue leaving a few briefcase billionaires to continue to ruin our nation. In the last 1 year, we saw the liberalization of AGO and aviation fuel. We are dealing with it. We've plugged that loophole. For PMS, we need more time to do this so we can put in place the social infrastructure that will support our people when we take this out.
I guess the same question for Prince Adebayo.
Yeah. Okay, let me start by saying that fuel subsidy is a metaphor for how the elite of Nigeria deodorize and beautify criminality. And the most dangerous part of the elite are those who provide the language to mollify grand looting as if it were a government policy. Even the way the question is framed in favor of those who are just economic bandits in the country. Number one, fuel subsidy is not the beginning. What is happening in Nigeria is like a government that guarantees a steady supply of mosquitoes into your bedroom, but is debating whether they should increase or lower the price of prophylactics for malaria. But if they just stop supplying mosquitoes, they will be able to take care of themselves. Number one, we have refineries that can refine 450 million barrels a day for local use and regional export. The thing that they've discovered is that if they capture the 450 million barrels, they can do whatever they like with it, make a swap with it, make it disappear, and not the rest of it. Because it's not everyone who has the energy to go to the creek and steal the pipeline, steal from the pipeline outrightly. Some just want to steal from the official one. So for that reason, the refineries have been put under disrepair. But those who are in charge of spending money to maintain refineries at the cost center will not let go of that subhead. So that money is still being paid in the name of turnaround maintenance and other endless contracts. So the 450 million barrels, which we decided to refine locally, is what they've gone into all sorts of arrangements and into swap. Now, after doing that, another problem occurred. And that problem is that more people who discover that there's lazy way to make money, and especially easy way to give politicians money. So don't be surprised if I'm elected president today, the first set of people after recovering from the heart attack of me being elected, the first set of people to be offering money, private jet, all of this will include those who benefit from this subsidy. They will tell you the easiest way for the first lady to get $10 million without working. So that is what is happening. So the end result of it is that, one, the consumption for the domestic consumption, it doesn't matter how the GDP goes up or down or whatever, 70 million liters are said to be consumed daily. The figures change according to the degree of desperation of the person giving the figure. But the bottom line is that the debate that is being framed to the public is whether you should subsidize fuel for the poor or not. And either way you answer that question, you are falling victim of their syllogism. Number one, we don't need to subsidize petrol by importing. The best ways to subsidize petrol is by local production. If you want to subsidize something the long-lasting way for your people is to give internal capacity to produce it. So the first thing to do is to give internal capacity to produce our own domestic consumption. One, by making sure that the 4 refineries work, 2 in Port Harcourt, 1 in Warri, 1 in Kaduna, and they could work under an O&M contract anytime. Secondly, technology has improved now for refining products. So with a cracker on a modular refinery, you should be able, in 18 months, even some of them, you can wheel them across the sea. So you should be able to put about 20, even if you lease them, they will start producing enough for you. Thirdly, we need to understand that people use petrol for the least important of our productivity. We use it to move around. Like yesterday, as I was roaming about spreading my message, I was using petrol in my cars. However, the food I ate, the clothes I wore, everything else is powered by diesel. Vehicles that carry most of these things are on diesel. The power that generates in my house, other people's houses, is either diesel. In my own case, I use solar, but most people use diesel. And this diesel is not part of the discussion of subsidy. So to summarize this crime into a government policy is one, I will make sure that domestic refineries work. If they work, this question goes away. Second, I will ensure that public transportation is done on gas. I'm sure that Farouk will know that in Atlanta, Martha runs his buses on natural gas. And with the Martha card, you can always, if you are old, if you're a public servant, whatever you are, once you have a Martha card, you can actually use the card. And they don't care about the price of petrol. So those are the things we need to do in our cities to make sure that if you're a public servant, if you are a student, if you are employed, it's part of your right to have a card. And CNG buses, there are so many of them, I know where they are in various warehouses. Canada alone, if you can tropicalize some of their own, they will send it to you. It's all over the world. We can do that quickly. And we have converters that can easily be installed. So what I will do is to make sure that I remove petrol from the discussion completely by building a refinery and by making sure that public transportation does not depend on it. And at the end of the day, this issue of subsidy will not even arise at all.
Can I come a little bit here? I think there's a fusion of 2 distinct issues. One is corruption in subsidy administration and the notion of subsidy itself. I like Prince Adebayo's response, but It's more futuristic. Now I'm saying, as it is right now, the refineries are not working, and it's not possible to get them to work in the next few months. Let's start there. Do you think that there is merit in taking and tackling corruption and ensuring that subsidy gets to who it deserves to go to? Because discussions on subsidy always ignore the subsidies that sustain the Sabbatarian lifestyles of the elite. There's way more money spent in sustaining the elites, in subsidizing lifestyles of the elite, than in ensuring that petrol prices or gas prices are within reasonable limits, so that they don't affect transportation costs, which affects the prices of commodities in the market. So there's a domino effect when the cost of petrol is high. Although it does not power food, it powers so many other things that determine prices. And that affects the lives of the people. So corruption is one thing. And I get it that we should not enrich a few fat cats in the name of subsidizing petroleum products. But the debate has moved in a completely different direction, which is that subsidy is evil. It should be done away with. And that is where that's the problem that I want us to address. Where do you stand when it comes to subsidizing the life, of everyday people who are exposed to the elements, who need help? And the idea that people don't need help has no basis in any system of governance that I've ever known. I live in the United States here, the patron saint of capitalism, the belly of the beast. No one says you should not subsidize petroleum products. Petroleum products are subsidized right here. As I'm talking to you in Georgia, we pay way less than most people do in other parts of the state. How do they subsidize it? Gas tax holidays. The federal government, that is done as well. So that's the debate I want us to have to face.
You see, when you're running a government, you are trying to solve actual problems of the people. In the course of that, there are 1,000 debates people want to get you into. You decide, if you are running a proper government, you decide which debate you want to get into. There's a debate, some debates are just straw man debates. A straw man debate, you just go into it. Whether you win or not, the person who is committing the crime is escaping. One, if we are talking of subsidy, petroleum subsidy is not the biggest subsidy. For 1.something trillion that we are shouting about, naira for subsidy, we have 16 trillion in industrial subsidies that don't produce any productivity, wafers and all of those things. So there are a lot of subsidies. So once I come into government, number one, the corruption side goes away. Because you could see where, that's why I'm running a shoestring budget. That's why I'm not doing live streaming, any of these things. That you can't trace the money of any of these people to my campaign. That's number one. So once we come in, the subsidy guys, majority of what is contained there is the fraud. Majority. It's not like 10%. You can ignore 10% fraud, 20% fraud should not even be ignored. But if you are powerless, you can ignore that. But you cannot ignore 75% fraud. That's what I'm letting you know. So the first thing, once I come in, I will verify there's no MD Rudolph that has not sailed into West Africa in about 13 years that would end up collecting money for supplying to Atlas Cove. And there is a non-existent MV Farouk. There's no ship called MV Farouk, but we are paying for it. So that one we can end immediately. It's not futuristic. We come in, if we can survive, we can run a stable government that can survive all the backlash, the media that they will hire and give money to, and also the riots they will put on the street. We can immediately stop that fraudulent part of it. And they can go to the corrupt judges in the High Court and get a High Court order that they have a contract, they have to pay them. If we can survive all of that, we will stop majority of the money going to fraudulent hands without even announcing any policy on subsidy at all. Secondly, if we can get NNPC has gone into some complicated contracts, which I want you to understand. There are a lot of complicated contracts that NNPC has gone into over this swap, which whether or not you even receive these petroleum products, you already have it to pay. You cannot just terminate because they've tied our hand in many ways. But what I'm letting you know is that I will systematically, without even making any changes to this issue of subsidy. One, I will remove the 16 trillion. That's why you see a lot of big men will start to check themselves into psychiatric hospital. I will remove 16 trillion that we don't put in our budget, that we give to so-called industrialists who don't industrialize anywhere. If I do that and do other checks, the money being spent on subsidy, about 1% trillion, will not be my priority. It's at number 7 in my list of things which I need to eliminate. But I will eliminate in a way that it won't affect the pricing of petroleum in the market.
Okay. Does Dumebi have any response to that?
Okay. I believe Farouk. Yes. Can you hear me?
It
You're
breaks.
going in and out.
It breaks.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now.
Okay, is it better? Is it better now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear us?
If you want to subsidize, revolution,
We
if
can
you want to
hear you.
subsidize
Yes.
revolution, Sowore is here.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes,
can
we
hear
can hear
you.
you.
Rudolph, I think he has some technical difficulties. I think we should move on because of
Yes.
Yeah.
when he
Okay.
reconnects, we can go back to him.
Okay. All right. So
Are you able to hear me?
yes.
Yeah, we can hear
yes.
you.
We can hear you.
For 1 minute, yes.
Can hear us.
Okay, great. Okay, I was just going to say on subsidy, I think Farouk's question still remains, is subsidy relevant or not? We are not doubting or disagreeing that subsidy is relevant. But in a nation that is fantastically corrupt, where we have seen that law enforcement has not been able to stem or do anything about the corruption in the subsidy process, that's why we are looking at taking out subsidy, even though it's going to cost us a lot in terms of how it affects the poor. If you look at the structure of NMPC today, how will I want to tackle the fraud that is going on there if we are liberalizing the sector, right? And you have people being able to bring in products. If government wants to subsidize the products, you subsidize at source. That's at the point they come into the country. But if you see what happened 10 years ago, we had disparate records about the vessels that came in. Even the multinational companies that manage our ports were implicated in that process. So we have looked at this and said, because our people, the process is so corrupt, that's why we need to do away with this. Do away with this completely, take that money and start seeing how we can support those who really need that subsidy. You mentioned that there's subsidy in transportation process in system in America. That's why we said that if we have social systems like that, we need to subsidize those processes instead of subsidizing the people who are importing, inflating the figures and taking away billions of naira. But yes, subsidy is absolutely relevant. If you know the price or how the removal of subsidy in diesel or in aviation fuel has affected Nigeria, nobody speaks about that. Now you have big men, a lot of people who use diesel generators are going using this fireman petrol generator, it's making noise all over the place and polluting the environment. But it's a big cost on our industries and it's affecting Nigeria greatly. And this is because we are not able to manage the corruption. If we say dedicate personnel, dedicate manpower, and use technology and processes to face or tackle the corruption, how long before we get there? This is what we are faced. No matter the person we bring into EFCC, ICPC, and the police and what have you, they have been unable to combat this multi-billion-dollar fraud that goes on there. This is why we say, take away this money and let's reinvest this money into other areas that we can at least see that it's getting to the right people who need it.
Thank you very much. It's my delight to welcome Omoyele Sowore, the presidential candidate of the African Action Congress. Mr. Sowore, you're welcome to the debate. So I don't know, Farouk, if you have another question, or are we going to another section?
Yeah, I think we should move to the next, except Sowore wants to jump in and share his thoughts on
Petroleum
subsidy. On subsidy as a concept, not how it's implemented in Nigeria. He's muted.
Oh, that's a Sowore.
Sowore is muted.
Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead, Sowore.
If Sowore, if the presidential candidate of the AAC is going to intervene at this point, given that he has arrived a little late, we're going to limit his time. Sowore, you will have about 1 minute on this question of petroleum subsidy.
Thank you. My position is based on facts with regards to petroleum subsidy, and after 2012. We found out that the idea itself is a scam, and this was simple. There was a protest in Nigeria, well, I would say globally, against the Jonathan regime regarding petroleum subsidy. And when the protest was over, they came around and said they have found out that it's a scam, and actually arrested people. Well, they started prosecuting them, and I can tell you nobody was ever jailed for that scam. One of the things we found out about petroleum subsidy was that most of the people who were importing fuel weren't really importing fuel. Some of them, and that was the most dramatic of it all, said they were importing fuel in a vehicle that has sank 20 years before. Yes, that was what we found out in those days. And it's the same way I feel today, that they are not subsidizing subsidy. And it has even got official. The Nigerian Customs Service, NCS, said they have not been able to verify that Nigerians are consuming 61 million, I think, liters of fuel. They confronted the NNPC with it, and the NNPC has not denied it. The second aspect of it, which I'll quickly round up, is that as of yesterday, the NNPC is now saying that even though over 6 trillion naira was budgeted for petroleum subsidy, the Nigerian government doesn't pay for it. So they deduct, according to the GMD of NNPC, now with a limited liability company, that they are the ones doing the deduction. The government budgets for it, but they don't pay them. And that's the basis for them not remitting a dime into the federation account from the NNPC. That's where we are. All of this is a scam until we're able to find out that there's something being properly subsidized. I don't believe there's a subsidy of petroleum products.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to do the next section, and the next section is going to be education. Nigerian lecturers basically on Valentine's Day, February 14 of 2022, started a strike, and that strike lasted for exactly 8 months. This is a familiar experience in the experience of a familiar phenomenon in the experience of Nigerian students. So the question that I have for the three candidates, and I'll like Mr. Sowore to begin, is what do you see as the central problems in the country's educational sector? And as succinctly as possible, what kind of policy prescriptions would you have to address those problems?
Well, there are two things involved. One is funding for public education, but I also think it must be clearly stated that the problem with public education is not limited to tertiary institutions. There are over 20 million kids who are out of school, primary and secondary schools. And there's also a question of how many students do you have in tertiary institutions? When we did our research, we found out there are 1.7 million students who are students in tertiary institutions. And this spread across both public tertiary institutions and private. So if you look at what is in the public, we're talking about almost 1 million students, and there are about 700,000 students in private institutions. So it's a question of funding. And when I was a student leader in the 90s, the Academic Staff Union of Nigerian Universities were asking for 1.9 billion naira just so that they can take care of all the needs in federal institutions in our days. And this was around 1992, 1993. Yes. The money was never made available to them. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I was wondering, could you, because in the interest of time, if you can frame your responses within 1 minute, please.
All right. So, and I don't know why Prince has a Roku Post TV on his. That's Adewole. Is it working for Rudolph?
You know, you have to have a plan B. Against this election goes against your wish, you have a plan B.
It's also obviously, I don't know, maybe they have maybe Prince wants to run out of Nigeria after the election.
All right. So I'd like to invite. Yes, I'd like to invite Mr. Kachikwu actually to respond to that question quite very briefly. What you define as the central problems of education in Nigeria and your solutions.
Okay, I think that the major challenge we have with education in Nigeria is that we have not redefined education for the modern day, and we have not redefined education for the future that we want for Nigeria. When China decided that they wanted to be an industrial giant, they had to redefine education to support their vision. We don't have a vision that we've tied our education charter to, and that's one of the greatest challenges. You started by talking about the ASU strike. Yes, the ASU strike had its merits on both sides, but one of the greatest challenges you have within the education sector is the fact that those who lead us, those who manage our processes, there's a huge disconnect. So what will I do as a solution, right? We need to ensure that those who lead us actually feel the pains of those who they lead. I long proposed Nigerian Patriot Act, which simply states that public officials, those directors of companies that derive their operating license from government, their families, their children, they must all go to public schools. They must not use generators in their houses. They must not have boreholes in their houses. They must travel by road unless it's an emergency. Now, if we can make those who lead us feel what the poor man feels or experiences, what will happen is that as Nigerians, we will all come together and within a short time ensure that we are properly funding key sectors or solving the problems in those sectors. Finally, in education, we have this notion in Nigeria that education must be funded by government. No, those of you who are based in America, you understand that education is funded by private parties also. Their endowments, grants, and what have you. What are our rich doing to support the educational sector? During the Jonathan government, I proposed then that if you take all the senatorial districts, look at all the institutions we have there and identify all their big men in that district, come up with the requirements that they need there, be it IT infrastructure, be it schools and what have you, reduce it into a plan and a budget and get these people to fund in addition to what government is doing. Then you begin to see something that is working in that sector.
Thank you very much. Prince Adebayo, please, the same question.
Okay, thank you. Like I'm always looking at this way we frame our questions in Nigeria. And like I said in the metaphor regarding mosquitoes, when it comes to our education, it's like we're debating not how to heal the patient who has malaria, but how to regulate the temperature of patients of malaria. So that's what we discuss. We don't discuss educational policy. We discuss industrial relations in the tertiary institutions. That's all. ASU. That's not the problem. ASU is a symptom of a bigger problem. The bigger problem in Nigeria is that we have no government in place. What we call government is not a government. When you run a government properly and you make social investment and you give educational sector the requisite minimum investment that you need to give, you have accountability and clear freedom from at least an attempt to reduce corruption to the minimum, and you let the universities have their autonomy. ASU will not go on strike. I know ASU members, they are not crazy people. They love the job. The reason why they are there in the first place is because they love the job. They have alternatives. So the problem is that the government is not a government. Government is anti-education. So what we will do, once you elect a proper government, an SDP government, the first thing we do is that we give education its due in the proper appropriation. Remember, because we are not involved in subsidy scam, we're not involved in the criminality, called waivers and all of that, we will bring a lot of money to the covers. That's number one. Two, we will ensure that universities have proper autonomy. And that is intellectual autonomy, because you have to ensure that the governing council of university is not for those who fail to become governor or fail to become senators. You just put them there. They have people who know about education and who can run the university system clearly. The issue of remuneration of university officials is a comprehensive thing. The idea is that it is an oxymoron to have a university lecturer who is poor. They belong to the upper middle class, and the purchasing power of their salary should be such that they can live a very comfortable life free from worries and other that would push them in sharp practices they can concentrate. So to have a more organic approach to our educational system is that we will have, for the first time, a reasonable autonomy for the universities, heavy investment in social sector education. For example, to discuss the salary of lecturers without tying it to possession power, without tying it to the living condition, without tying to other amenities which you require to function as an upper middle class professor or senior lecturer, is not complete. Fourthly, we have to deal with the issue of the fact that the lecturers are tired of lying. The ASU strike is bad, but it's not the worst. The worst is giving somebody a degree in chemistry who cannot titrate, giving somebody a degree in computer science who doesn't have even a computer set. So this is what the university wants us to address, and they're easy to address. If you take 10% of the money that EFCC claims that it has been seizing, if you put that money as special fund into education, all of these things will disappear. And I can tell you, one thing I will conclude this component with is that, one, if we run away from every social program on the basis that they can be abused, if you remove subsidy because there's corruption in it, but you don't tackle the corruption, almost every government program will fail. Because whether it is...
Could we leave it there?
Yes.
Could we leave, because we're running short on time. I'd like to, if you don't mind, put in another quick question on education. All right. And I'd like to start with you again, Mr. Sowore. Late last year, the federal government came out with a policy of mother tongue education, especially beginning in the primary schools. The idea is that it's important for kids to internalize and understand concepts in their mother tongue. Is this a policy that you will support? And if so, if not, why not?
Well, you cannot have mother tongue education without mother tongue instructions. I often refer to the haste by Nigerians to translate the Bible into local languages. There are 70 local language Bibles in Nigeria, but there's not a single physics book written in Yoruba language, or a geography book written in Robo, or a chemistry book that's written in Hausa. So you have to first and foremost address the issue of instructions, because what drives any form of education is that if the method of instruction was written down in that language that you want to teach people in. So first and foremost, we must address that. If you don't have a computer book that says, hey, this is what you call algorithm in Hausa or Yoruba or Robo or Ibibio, you can't just force people to do mother language education. That has to be addressed. The issue of curriculum was first of all be addressed. I can guarantee you they'll find people who can write a computer book or a physics book in Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, and then we can then say, look, we go and teach people in mother language. You can find, you can find this in Kenya, instructional materials that are written in, the Kenyan language, you can find it in other places. You can find it in Russia, Swahili. You can find it written in Japanese. You find it written in Chinese. But you don't have any of these subjects. And not even a Yoruba book these days, they will put at the back of it, published by Macmillan. It's not written in any Yoruba.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kachikwu, could you please, as briefly as possible?
Yeah, it's very simple. While it seems to make sense, on the other hand, in terms of implementation, it doesn't make sense. How do you protect the minority languages in a nation like Nigeria that has a lot of languages? How do you decide that you are going to go with 3 main languages, Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba? What happens to this feeling that ethnic minorities still continue to have in Nigeria, where we seem to say they don't exist or they are invisible to us? So when we look at that, and that's one of the reasons why English has been chosen in Nigeria as a national language of some sort. I think going back now, trying to revisit or bring up this issue of languages in instruction in our educational system, and then the time it takes you to tutor the instructors in those languages and dealing with all the languages, how do you deal with which language you will use and what have you? I believe that we should focus our energies in dealing with the vision we have for education in this modern age.
Thank you very much. Mr. Prince Adebayo, please, briefly.
Well, I can say that it's a fallacy of false dilemma. You can do all of the above. There's no problem with that. You can be fluent in English, which we require. It's the business language in the world. And one of the few advantages we have anywhere we go in the business world is that we speak English. Hopefully, we'll continue to speak better English with the direction that we're raising now. Second, that we don't lose our indigenous languages as well. And for someone like me, I'm required to be fluent not only in English, I'm fluent in Yoruba, I should be fluent in Ondo language, I should be fluent in Arabic as well, because I have some Islamic tradition in our family. And I also should be also fluent in French. So anything. The important thing is that we cannot centrally control everything. Raise the quality of education, put education on the concurrent list where it is now, and everybody. So you discover that Zamfara State gives you somebody who's fluent in physics, in Arabic. That's not a problem. Somebody who wants to use CBD, even if they want to bring it back to learn calculus, there's no problem. The important thing is that the school must run, teachers must be there, and because we are diverse in this country, we'll have enough. There was time I was doing something for the Moroccan government. They said their best Arabic translator was a man from Ilorin. So, there's no problem. We are over controlling everything.
Yeah,
let's raise the quality and the standard. That's all.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over the baton to my great colleague, Sonalo Lumese.
Thank you. Okay. Well, we are running out of time, so I'm going to appeal to the candidates to be even briefer in their responses to this. This segment is about multidimensional poverty in Nigeria. We've become the poverty capital of the world. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2063 of the African Union both regard this problem of poverty and inequality very highly. My question to each of you, beginning with Adebayo, is this: what will you do and how will you make sure that your response or proposed response to this question of poverty and inequality works?
The question is for who?
We're beginning with you. How will you respond to the question of poverty.
As you know, sir, I'm the only one running on farewell to poverty and insecurity as my slogan, as my message. And Nigeria being poor, I'm not surprised that we're the poverty capital of the world. We are the corruption capital of the world. We are the robbery capital of the world. So people have been robbed of their entitlement for 60 years. They are bound to be poor. But the good thing is that poverty can leave this generation by one, stopping the robbery, making investment in social sector, making sure that we invest in agriculture, we invest in things that make people poor, housing, we invest in generating full employment. There's a way I can rewrite the current budget when we come in. If we rewrite the current budget and you take the procurement away and rewrite it, you will be able to lift at least 60 million people out of poverty. So the most important thing is that poverty here is not an accident. It is a government policy that it brought people to be poor. The country itself doesn't want you to be poor. Every environment. I traveled yesterday, the length that I traveled yesterday is bigger than Western Europe. And I didn't meet any government presence in Taraba, in part of Adamawa, in part of Nasarawa. So in conclusion, poverty can be programmatically reduced and eliminated in Nigeria, but you have to have good governance that is making social investment in things that make people poor. And that is very clear. If you don't do it, you can be part of the statistics for World Bank or anybody forever.
Mr. Kachikwu, please, 4 minutes.
I believe that Nigeria is running out of time on how to deal with the poor in Nigeria. I believe that we have less than 6 months to deal with the poverty rate we have in Nigeria before Nigeria begins to implode. How do we deal with poverty? First of all, government has to begin to understand that government has to provide an enabling environment for all her citizenry to thrive. That's the role of government. If we understand that, government has to now begin to look at all our assets and how to activate those assets so that Nigerians can build upon the assets as a foundation for them to thrive in the year 2023. It will interest you to know that we still in this year continue to export raw materials to other nations, whereas what we ought to be doing to create jobs in Nigeria is for us to ensure that those companies that need those raw materials, they should come into Nigeria and produce and manufacture in Nigeria. If we look at the service-based industries where we see Nigerians are thriving, like artists and what have you, what is government really doing to build platforms like Fiverr, Freelancer, and what have you, so that people can stay at home with good broadband service and export their skill sets all over the world? What are we doing with tourism? Our big men leave Nigeria to Miami, the Caribbean, and what have you, for the same water that we have passing Echo here. There are so many areas that we can use to begin to create employment for our unemployed so that we can start helping our people. And then we need to start looking at how to support our weak, our poor, our elderly, our youths. We need to start looking at, when we speak about subsidy, beyond subsidy, we need to start putting social systems to help these people get through this trying period.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Sowore, you have the last remarks on this subject, but I'm going to go to Farouk, who's supposed to be handling our next segment, so that maybe he can combine both your next remarks, and our closing segment together.
Okay. Oh, you want me to ask?
Farouk, we're going to be handling the segment on security. I was wondering if you would combine that with the closing remarks, so that what Mr. Sowore says next concerning poverty will be combined with the closing remarks he will be making anyway. Can we do that?
Okay, so you want me to proceed to ask the question on security, yes, or?
No, the question has been asked. I guess we're inviting Sowore to answer that question, but also to build in his closing remarks, yes, into that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Chief Sowore.
So,
yes, thank you very much. I think the solution is very direct. You know, in a country where they talk about multidimensional poverty, there's also multidimensional wealth. but the question is, how do you manage and how do you redistribute this wealth? I had an argument in a studio, a Rice TV studio in Lagos, with a PDP spokesperson for Atiku today, and he was telling me that the problem with Nigeria is that when you have 100,000 people, 100,000 naira, you can either share it with two people who have 500,000 each, or you can share it with 100 persons who gets 10,000 each. And you discover that when you give 10,000 each to 100 people, you have a more progressive society. You have a prosperous society than when you give it to two people. So their direct response to how to deal with distribution of wealth is to give it to two people, and for the two people to now be sharing it with whomever they like. Look at what they are doing now with the so-called Naira redesign. It was a policy that was meant, to grab power and to grab people's wealth. This is the only country in the world where you have money and you can withdraw it from a bank. Even when the physical paper was introduced, I was asking people, and this is part of our problem. We don't ask questions. Is that some 2 years before now, the central bank came out and said they were setting up e-Naira. So what happened to e-Naira? How do you set up e-Naira first, and then you go into the bush to fetch trees to now make paper Naira again? It doesn't make sense. But they spent a lot of money on the e-Naira. They said it was the best thing to happen. They're the first country in the world to introduce electronic Naira. And then 2 years later, they went into the bush and fell all the trees, and they're trying to make, paper Naira. It doesn't make sense. That's why I agree with Prince here that.
Yeah. So could you make your closing remarks?
Nothing will ever work. We don't have a government, and the government here practices socialism for the rich, and then they tell the rest of the country to go and work hard. And when things don't work, they already know who to blame. They always blame the poor for not working hard enough. And like they are doing in the Naira, they tell you, oh, why are you looking for so much money? Why don't you just stay with small Naira? We're trying to dispossess the rich of huge amount of money. And the Central Bank of Nigeria came out 2 days ago that the first 500 billion Naira they put out into circulation were mopped up by politicians. But they said to us when they started that, we just want to make sure politicians don't have money to buy votes. And the simple question I asked them is that, so in another 4 years, are you going to change the Naira so that they will have no ability to buy votes? And if you are redesigning the Naira, when are you going to redesign the dollar? So that, because Nigerian politicians don't spend Naira. So you also have to redesign the dollar so that we won't have enough dollars to buy votes. So I agree totally with everybody who said we don't have a government, and we must start thinking about getting a government in place so that we can address the issue of inequality, poverty, and want in our system. And thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to ask the last question on security. We know that one of the issues that dogged the Goodluck Jonathan administration, which became the basis for its ouster, was the what we thought the deepening and breathing of insecurity. But now we've seen increased bloodshed all over the country, and it appears that every year is more insecure than the previous year. So, what policies, programs, thoughts, perspectives, insights do you guys have on how to bring about lasting security in the country? How to reverse the theaters of bloodshed that continue to envelop the country? I'm going to start with Mr. Dumebi Kachikwu. Please, 1 minute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So answer security in 1 minute. Okay, first of all, we have to understand that what's going on with security stems from, one, our economic challenges, two, our divisions as a people that are based on tribe, tongue, and religion, three, the fact that we have an extremely porous border, four, we have a president whose body language seems to suggest that his kith and kin from any part of the world can waltz into our country, live in our country, take over our farmlands, and do whatever they need to do in Nigeria. If we understand all this, then we now begin to know how to tackle security. I believe that we don't have enough personnel on ground to deal with the different theaters of war we have across Nigeria. I will immediately bring on board 200,000 men and women from the civil defense and police, because they are already trained in the art of carrying weapons to complement the war effort we have now. I will then immediately go after those who come in through our borders. We need to start bringing up those walls, and we need to start using technology, drones, USVs, and UGVs to tackle the porousness of our borders. We also need to understand the role that budgeting has played in the current warfare. President Jonathan had a 100 billion internal security budget, which President Buhari inherited. He has not increased, even though the war and the theaters of war have increased and have spread. And he's not implementing 50% of that budget. We need to fund security properly. If you remember what happened with the Kaduna train bombing, imagine a situation where you have to do about 8 sorties a day to monitor that train line. And because the cost of aviation fuel has increased, because of the cost of diesel has increased, and you're not getting enough funding, you reduce the sorties to 2 or 3 a day. The terrorists understand that you have reduced it. They know your pattern, and they attack when they know that you are not there. That's why you hear that you have 100 motorcycles and vehicles going across Nigeria with hundreds of people and nobody sees them, because we are not properly funded. We need to fund these people more. And then Nigerians need to understand that Nigeria is at war. We are one of the only nations in the world where we are at war, and most people don't actually believe we are at war until the war gets to their doorstep. If we are at war, if we understand we are at war, the local gathering of intelligence will improve to help our security agencies. Then our security agencies need to be more coordinated. We have a non-functioning NSA now that has not helped the war effort. It just seems to exist on paper. And that's why there's no serious coordination amongst the different security agencies. Then as president of Nigeria, my body language will clearly say to all Nigerians that any Nigerian life lost will be avenged. I will go after anyone. I'll make clear to everyone that a Nigerian life is precious to me, and I will protect all Nigerian lives.
Thank you so much. Next, Prince Adewole.
Okay, let's take it clear. Let us have an appreciation of the situation. What is happening in Nigeria, if you want to know, that Nigeria is a territory of different economic warlords, socio-political warlords. So Nigerian elite, as we call them, even though they look like us, they have the same skin with us, some of them are relatives, they're actually like drug lords who have shared the country into territory. So what you find you call insecurity is like you go to Miami in the days of cocaine trade, and warlords are fighting over territory. That's number one. So the first thing you need to do is to form a government that the warlords are not fighting over that government. That's what is happening in Nigeria, number one. And number two is that the warlords in Nigeria, some of them are representative of international concerns. So we need to take care of our national security in such a way that our land is not a territory where a militarized version of the Berlin Conference scramble for Africa. There's a scramble for Nigeria, of which Nigerian politicians and political elite are part of that. Some acting for themselves, some acting for foreign agents. Second is that the security architecture it doesn't need funding, and I disagree with Dumebi in that regard. It's not the funding. They are well funded, but the funding is looting. And to say that there's no coordination, there's coordination in security. They may be coordinated by a young man who used to sell recharge card, but it's being coordinated somewhere. And the coordination is based on appropriation and spending. If you look at the amount of money being spent off balance sheet, it's a very serious amount of money. The third issue is dealing with intelligence. The intelligence in Nigeria is all over the place. I have traveled around the country. I've been to Madagali, I've been to Baga, I've been to Mubi, I've been to the West Corridor in Niger State and all of that, further up down to Kwara and up to Kebbi. There's no part of Nigeria that I have not been to, and there's no part of Nigeria that the army cannot handle. But the issue is that there's a cadre, I don't want to be, maybe from course 35 upwards, they have made up their mind that they are going to become terrorist billionaires. And if you look at their seniors who came before them, many of them retired and looking for their pension. But very few army generals who have retired in the last 10 years is go to pension office to collect money. They've made enough money. So this is what I need to coordinate in my government. Lastly, I have to ensure that the Nigerian people themselves get busy with full employment, get busy with other activities. That's the only way you can deal with security, because national security is not always kinetic. There are some aspects of it that you have to deal with before you deal with how many bullets you've got and all of that. It's a comprehensive issue. 1 minute is not enough, but I touched a piece of it.
Thank you. Lastly, Mr. Sowore.
Well, let me ask my friend, maybe if he found out that his party has endorsed another candidate today. I know we're not supposed to discuss this publicly, but that's part of insecurity that's ravaging in Nigeria. That you have a party, he has a candidate, and the party doesn't believe in their candidate.
That's the fake executive, not the real one. The real one is still with Dumebi.
No, that's so. But the other thing to discuss about security is to understand levels of insecurity, and I have divided into two. The first most important security that we don't discuss in Nigeria is the security of persons in terms of their economic security, and when you don't take care of that, ensure that people have jobs, they get their pension paid on time, and they have some form of security that shows that when they're vulnerable, the system is out there for them. If you don't take care of that one at first, it doesn't matter how many bullets you have, you're wasting your time. I just came from Bauchi recently, and I actually found out that the best way to be insecure in Nigeria is to be driving around with a huge convoy of security agents, because that attracts the attention of people who are looking for targets. And the other part of it is to understand security beyond physical security. Look at it from economic security. In Nigeria, for instance, many people talk about cyber security. And in the next 10 years, the war that is fought against nations will be on the internet. Nobody will have to leave their house to shoot at anybody. They look at your water resources and how it is generated. They look at your waste management system. They look at your airline system, and they shut it down just with a stroke of computer. And nobody's talking about that here. Nobody's talking about national security, which is who is a Nigerian? How do they come in through the border? How do they live? These are fundamental issues that are not being addressed. But the second aspect of it is to also look at what are the low-hanging fruits for security. For instance, to fight security. For instance, why is it that the nation of Nigeria with 200 million people don't have drones that can track and attack? The only drone base on the continent of Africa is based in Mali, is owned by the US. The US will tell you, and because we meet them all the time, the agents in town will tell you that if they want to wipe out Boko Haram, it will take less than 1 week. And this is because they have solid intelligence of their location, their movements. They have infrared equipments all over Nigeria every time. But their interest is not to save Nigeria. Their interest is to colonize or recolonize Nigeria. So they're asking Nigeria for a base, the African base, for them to help Nigeria. And like Prince have also said, insecurity has become a big business in Nigeria. Any security system that moves from an ordinary security system and becomes a business can never be resolved. All the army generals, the Inspector General of Police, the NIA, we met with all of them at a recent meeting, and I can tell you how incompetent they are. They are more interested in how much can we make from the situation, and they don't want this insecurity to end. Quote me, there's nobody in the armed forces that want insecurity to end, because if they do and there's no more insecurity, they'll have nothing else to do, and they like to keep making money. Even you can ask other candidates who are here, for us to get police protection, you must be willing to pay the Nigerian police. You pay from the CP, the policemen who are following you must be paid individually. So how do you expect Nigeria to be secure when from the Inspector General to the last person who is following you wants to get paid? It's the same thing that they do with terrorists. The terrorists know them, they know the terrorists. I can tell you that. But there's a place in Borno State, for instance, where there's a boundary between Nigerian army and Boko Haram. They supply drugs to women across the border, and they are fine. They have no problem. you know, and they allow them free movement across the border and back to Nigeria. But if anybody goes to that place to come and take over, that it is the Nigerian army that will kill you, even if you are in the Nigerian army. So these are issues that are not being talked about. And it's very important. And we keep saying this again, because if you look at even the platform that we have here, the people who claim to be frontliners will never come here. Not even the ones that some of you believe in. They will never come here because they don't have the capacity to have the kind of conversation we are having now. One final thing I would say is that these are some of the finest people you can find in this election. Prince, Dumebi, myself, there are some others. And I've actually set up a government based on this fine gentleman here. Prince is going to be our Attorney General. Dumebi will be Minister of Petroleum. All the finest.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. On that point,
That is more generous than the Minister of Finance that Peter Obi offered me. Yours is more generous.
Why would anybody make you Minister of Finance knowing that you?
I don't know. I think they don't know what they're doing. And Dumebi is promising me that I'll be Prime Minister in non-existent positions. So I don't know what he's thinking.
Thank you very much, John, for your very engaging
gosh.
which will really continue. But we're going to give you one more stab at the microphone in 45 seconds per man. Give us your closing remarks. What are you offering Nigerians as an overall? What is your final offer you're making to Nigerians for this election, 2023, as a presidential candidate? I'll begin with you again, Prince Adewole.
Prince,
we are beginning with you on this point. Are you ready?
Prince, you have the floor.
maybe.
He's frozen.
Okay, let's begin with Mr. Kachikwu then. The final.
Thank you very much, my distinguished moderators, fellow Nigerians. I thank you for the opportunity of to listen to me tonight. Like I said earlier on, Nigeria is at a crossroads with this election. We need to face who we are, face our realities as a people. We are entering an election that seems to be determined or being defined by tribe, tongue, and religion once again. Our fathers handed over these problems to us, and we seem to want to continue living with these problems and want to hand over these problems to our children. I, as your president, or if given the honor to being your president, I will immediately tackle this problem headlong. We need to first and foremost build a nation, define a charter that ties and binds all Nigerians, so that we can see that this is the charter we signed on to, and then create a constitution based on this charter. Only when we do this can we begin to have a nation that Nigerians can be proud of. Only when we do this can we stem the tide of the middle class who leave Nigeria in droves every day because they no longer believe in Nigeria. Only when we do this can we begin to get our people to see themselves as one. The internal fights we're having that destroy our people, the regional fights we have, the community clashes we have will stop when we understand that we are one people. We are not one people. We need to tackle that headlong. As your president, I will immediately tackle the unemployment issue headlong. Over 40 to 60 million Nigerians who are unemployed, hopeless, helpless, not knowing what to do on a daily basis, nobody supporting them, nobody pointing them in the right direction. We need to retool these people. We need to repurpose these people. We need to let these people know that they are important. Nations identify their people as their asset. In Nigeria, our key asset seem to be oil and gas and our other solid minerals. I will let Nigerians know that Nigerian people are the real assets of Nigeria. In understanding that they are our assets, we will then use our God-given minerals to work for the Nigerian people and not the other way around. We need to plan for the future. Our future is being redefined by the virtual world. Our foreign affairs will be defined by the virtual world. In Nigeria, we don't seem to understand it. We control none of these infrastructures. Look at Metaverse, Instagram, and what have you. We don't control this infrastructure. And the day they shut us out, shut us down, our millions of youth who operate, who build businesses on this key infrastructure will lose their means of livelihood. We need to elect people who understand the modern reality of today. people who understand what the future is speaking about, so we can start planning for a new era in education, a new healthcare system that brings people to Nigeria, building modern infrastructure for our people, where we understand that broadband is a right to the modern Nigerian and not a privilege. We need to let our people know that government is a big brother, not just to protect them, but to love them and support them. We have never had leadership in Nigeria. Nigeria has failed along the lines of leadership, but we must reinstitute the culture of leadership. And finally, Nigerians, we are where we are today because followership. The Nigerian people allowed desperate men to rule us for this long. We've come to this defining moment, and we still see what's happening. 3 of us are here on this platform today. The rest refuse to come here. The mistake they have made in not coming here is that they cannot discuss the issues that are fundamental to the well-being of Nigeria. Were you to elect any of those people, they start disadvantaged because they don't understand the issues and they have not had the benefit of the fresh ideas we've discussed here today. Even though the time is short, we'll discuss ideas here. And that's what Nigerians need. Fresh ideas to take Nigeria in a totally different direction. As your president, I will love you, I will support you, I'll protect you, I'll ensure that I build a nation under the green, white, green of our flag. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Prince, please, you're next up for your closing remarks. 45 seconds. Prince?
Okay. I think Prince is actually seems to have disappeared.
Yeah, he's frozen.
Hello?
Yes. We can hear you now, Prince. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. The first is that we owe it a duty. Yes. I know about our culture and tradition and so many things. We usually look unto God and divinity to do most of the things for us. But our problems, even though we put them in prayers, they're not spiritual. Our problems are problems of governance. And every country in the world faces the same question. The difference between us actually set up a government to address these issues. The reason why I'm here today is the emphasis that we need to have alternative narratives to development. And the narrative to development that I have is that we have to fulfill the promise, fundamental objectives and directive principle of state policy. And that doing that will enable us to eradicate poverty and unemployment and insecurity. And to do that, we need to have accountable politics. A politics where someone comes, states his ideas, and puts his own life and profile in front of you for scrutiny. And you scrutinize both their lives. And if you look at that and you believe in it, then we can.
I think his line is frozen.
Yeah. All right, we can go to Sowore and then we'll come back to him if his connection is good.
Sowore, you're up, but this is for 45 seconds.
Yeah. Thank you, moderators, fellow debaters, the timekeeper. That's how we used to say it in secondary school. For this amazing opportunity to have a discussion about the future of Nigeria. And I want to seriously and always say thank to Rudolph, Sonala, Okendebe, and Farouk Perogi. You have no business at this point thinking about Nigeria. A lot of people have put Nigeria behind them, but this is what we wake up to in the other part of on the other part of the Atlantic. And I do hope that we get a chance to elect leaders who understand the issues affecting Nigeria. And I put them in two ways. Nigeria has two major problems before you start breaking them down to the lower levels. We have foundational problems and institutional problems. What is the foundational problem? Is that Nigeria must discuss why it became a country and never became a nation. And that is where I have proposed that we must have a change completely of our constitution, put in place a brand new constitution for the country, discussed by all the components who form the country known as Nigeria, and then start moving Nigeria towards nationhood. Nigeria is not a nation. Don't let anybody deceive. It's just a country with boundaries and statistical, components. When it becomes a nation, it will be able to address so many of these issues. And the second part is that we have institutional problems. We have issues of security, power, education, and employment, economic equality, and cultural issues that has to be resolved. But until also we become a nation, that will not be addressed. And in addressing this, you must also put in place a government or leaders who understand this, not rulers. And that is what all these people we have here today are all about. I'm sure you all tried to reach out to all the candidates, 18 of them. But as of this morning, those 18 candidates have become, I think, 12, because 5 other candidates have endorsed another candidate. And by next week, more candidates would have endorsed other candidates. That's also part of the politics that we are fighting against here. And what is important is to look at this important forum and start to take a decision. Starting from today, we're likely to have election on Saturday, but I'm not sure, and I want to confess here, that the National Electoral Commission or Nigerian Electoral Commission is not prepared for a Saturday election. I don't know how they're going to do it with people not having money. There's no gasoline to even take electoral materials to their locations, and there are not people trained already, ready to operate what they need to do. But let's just hope that elections will happen on Saturday. And if they do so, those who are on our right side, on the comment side, either private or public comment, have a chance to elect real leaders from those who attended this event today. I can take any of these guys to lead Nigeria, and I mean it. But I believe that I'm the best, and I'm the only one who can straighten both the new and the old leaders and create a new order and a new country that will become a new nation where justice, peace, and progress and prosperity will reign supreme. I want to retire Ken Dibe, Sonala, Rudolph, and Perogi from writing articles about the problems of the one of my goals.
Thank you so Thank you
But
so
having
much.
said that, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much. Prince, you didn't conclude your remarks. We had to go someplace else because you were not. Are you ready?
Yeah, I do apologize. The internet failed me. I was at the point where I wanted to say that my number one manifesto is that I'll be the first government under which Sowore doesn't go to jail. So that's starting with that. He won't go to jail at all. At least that's enough democratic dividends for him. Yes. Yeah. But more seriously, we just need to come together and solve our problems. They are human problems. Our problems are anthropomorphic. We cause them by ourselves. If you look at our environment, everything, nature is prepared for us to have a good time in Nigeria. What we need to do is form a government that resembles a government. Too many ungoverned spaces in Nigeria and too many untouched lives in Nigeria. And what we need to do, we can be debating ideas. Any of the set of ideas will work. If it leads to an honest leader setting up a cabinet of honest citizens willing to help, and the public service that is organized to render services, not to take their own cut from the bleeding of the Nigerian people. And I will plead with Nigerians that every 4 years, there's always one film trick or the other. 2015, when I was talking that Buhari was a disaster, people who have been my friends for many years said that I was anti-Islamist, I was anti-North, I was this and that. And now they say I'm a prophet. If you ask them to look for a prophet, they will call me. The same thing is about to happen now. People are carried away by emotion. The governance is based on rationality. And a country has both domestic and foreign enemies.
Wow.
Yeah, I think we are going to have to rest it there. Over to you, Rudolph.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody that joined us, the candidates and moderators. Prince Adebayo, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, he's still frozen. Omoyele Sowore, thank you so much for joining us. Dumebi, Kachikwu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And then, of course, my moderators who did a wonderful job. Sonala, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And Farouk, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss the issue of debates. Why it's important that politicians, people who are seeking political offices in Nigeria, should subject themselves to debates where people can question them. If they don't do it now while they are begging for your votes, they are not likely going to do it when they get there. That's when you have people who don't have press conferences, who will not talk to Nigerian people. So we want to change that culture, and it starts with a conversation with my moderators. And after that, we're going to invite Nigerians to weigh in on what they think about the candidates and the idea that they could just come out on stage and dance and say, I want to dance, and that's their campaign. And people will vote for them and make them president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So on behalf of everybody who joined us to be there are so many newspapers and radio stations and TV stations who are partners in this project. I want to thank all of them and the people who are supporting us and cheering us and all those people watching at home. I thank you, and stay tuned for a continuation of the part 2 of this conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Iroko Post Media Group, Inc., in association with Iroko Post TV, invites you to the definitive debate of the 2023 presidential election season. Non-partisan Nigerian journalists Sonala Olumense, Okendebe, Farouk Perogi, and Rodolph Okonkwo, with nearly 200 years of combined experience in the profession, are pleased to invite you to the definitive presidential debate of 2023. Date: Sunday, February 19, 2023 at 6 p.m. Nigerian time, noon in New York, 7 p.m. in South Africa, 4 a.m. in Australia. The program will be televised in and outside Nigeria and carried live on all social media platforms. Here are the presidential candidates invited. All Progressives Congress parties, Bola.
Abubakar, I'm a pharmacist and a Nigerian with a passion for a better Nigeria. And I'm directing my question to Atiku Abubakar, and it's regarding employment and job creation, because that's what you keep mentioning. And as a successful businessman, I'll put it this way. I'm an applicant applying to work in your successful company. And after passing through some processes, your HR department, that's the human resource department, asked me to provide a referee from my previous place of work to enable me to secure a job. And I have something to say. This is the response of my employer, whom I've worked with for the past 8 years. And this is what he has to say, and I quote: his propensity to corruption, his tendency to disloyalty, his inability to say and stick to the truth all the time, his propensity for poor judgment, his belief and reliance on marabout, his lack of transparency, his trust in money to buy his way on all issues, and his readiness to sacrifice morality, integrity, propriety, truth, national interest for selfish interest. My question is, if my previous employee forward this reference to you, will you employ me?
All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rudolph, for those who do not know, and I welcome again Sonala. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Farouk, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
And okay, welcome to the show. All right, let's start with